How you living? What? How you living? What? How you living?
And live in color.
Welcome in. This is NCB Live. My name is Tate Bobach with Derek Hernandez. What's going on, Derek?
Nothing too much. It's been a slow news day over here, so I'm a little bored.
Yeah, not much is really going on in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Lawrence, Kansas, for that matter. Both of our schools looking to replace their head football coach, and Nebraska actually did so today, hiring Mike Riley from Oregon State. So give me your, first off, your first thought when you saw the news, and kind of what were you doing when you saw the news, and just give me your first take on it.
Well, I was at work when I saw a tweet come through my timeline, and at first I thought the Huskers account was hacked, but I looked through their timeline, it was an actual tweet. And the first part of me was thinking, okay, please be Teddy Riley instead of Mike Riley. I was hoping Blackstreet was coming to Nebraska for some reason. But no, I mean, his name was totally off the radar. I mean, I talked to all of my sources. Not one person mentioned his name. So the kind of the stealthiness that athletic director Sean Eichhorst wanted to have, he pulled it off. Nobody knew it. I mean, that's why we call him the Ginger Ninja now. Nobody knew what he was doing. But I was a little surprised. I was a little underwhelmed because I really wanted Dan Mullen. But I think if you look at what we wanted in a head coach, Mike Riley fits that profile other than being a big name.
So Dan Mullen was your first choice on who you wanted?
Yeah, I thought his personality, he was kind of a Tim Miles clone basically in that regard, but he had experience dealing with recruiting challenges. You know, Mississippi has the most talent per capita, but he was competing with Ole Miss, and there was not a lot of recruits out there, and he was competing in what was an NFL division in the SEC West. Really liked him. I thought his offense would fit in perfectly with the players we had. But I'm happy with Mike Riley. I mean, he wasn't my first choice, but I can see the positives in this hire.
What are the positives in this hire? What makes you happy with it?
Well, one, I think Corvallis, when he was out in Corvallis, he was competing with Nike money to get players, and before he got to that school, he was Oregon State was basically crap before he got there, and he pulled off a pretty good rebuilding job. And I'll pull up some stats that I looked at earlier today. But another plus for him, he's very PR savvy. He's a head coach. He's not an assistant with no experience. I think he can be that CEO type that we wanted. But here's some stats that I saw here. So, well, I guess one, he's liked by his peers. I think ESPN did some informal poll earlier in the year, and out of 97 of the 128 FBS coaches responded, they said he was voted number 2 underrated coach behind David Cutcliffe. And in voting among Power 5 coaches, he was tied for first with Michigan State's Mark D'Antonio. So he's well respected there. The coaches obviously see something in him. But I think he's going to be motivated. He's going to have the resources like he's never had before, and he can pull off some big wins, which is something Bo struggled with. Yeah, he won 9 games, but he wasn't beating anybody worth a crap. And now Mike Riley has experience beating teams that are more talented than his teams were.
Right. I think, you know, what people do is when they see Mike Riley, let's hop on Wikipedia and look at his year by year, and they see that in the last 2 years, he's won 12 games total, something like that. But people don't understand that, you know, like you said, they're in Corvallis, Oregon. They're in Oregon's shadow. I mean, if there's a top recruit in Oregon, he's going to probably go to the University of Oregon. If there's a top recruit in Northern California, he's going to go to Oregon before he goes to Oregon State. Now that he's at a bigger program, definitely, obviously a better program, a top 10, top 15 program in Nebraska, he's going to be able to get those recruits. So I definitely think that people need to look past that and look at the fact that I think in a 4-year stretch, he averaged 9 wins per game at one point at Oregon State. So I think that's definitely very impressive. But there was another school that actually hired their coach today. The Florida Gators hired Jim McElwain out of Colorado State. Michigan is also open. So I thought we would talk about, with Florida, Nebraska, and Michigan all having head coaching openings at the beginning of this week, how do we rank these in terms of which job is the best and which program is the best? I'll let you give out your rankings first.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I love the hire from Florida. I was a big Jim McElwain fan. He did wonders at CSU. They're getting a new stadium now. They basically put them on the map again. But if I had to rate the three schools, I'd probably have Florida number one based on solely on recruiting, and the SEC East is very winnable, and you're in the best conference. It's not as much of a slam dunk over the two other jobs as people want to say. Now, Nebraska, obviously, I'm most familiar with that program, but it all depends on how you look at it in terms of what's most desirable for you. Now, if you're talking strictly recruiting base, Nebraska is probably not in the top, 15, 10 jobs, but these schools are probably ahead of them. Bama, FSU, Ohio State, Florida, Texas, USC, LSU, OU, Notre Dame, and Florida, which we talked about there. But if we're talking about desirable jobs, if you look at Nebraska's division schedule, our overall path to the playoff, fan attendance, resources, being able to pull players from the walk-on program, tradition, a rather nice media, I think that's very underrated when coaches consider jobs. Yeah, we have expectations, but we're nowhere near as vicious as Michigan or Florida, and we're still very desirable there. Michigan is probably number three for me. I know if you ask ESPN's Joey Galloway, it's clearly Michigan. I think he was pretty adamant about that. But the AD situation there is kind of toxic for me. And something's just not right over there. I mean, take Rich Rod, for example. That dude can win anywhere else he's at. West Virginia, he won games. Arizona, he's winning games there. But for some reason, he can't win at Michigan. I think their program has been a little overrated for years. I mean, just take a look at their best coach ever in Bo Schembechler. He's never won a national title, but he always gets mentioned in some sort of pantheon of great coaches. I think there's just a lot of overrated aspects to Michigan. I mean, it's still a good job, but I think it's below Florida and Nebraska.
Yeah, that's fair. I think two things regarding that. Regarding the AD, Jim Harbaugh also, there's rumors that he really doesn't get along with the front office and the AD at Michigan. And if he did, he'd probably be heading to Ann Arbor after this year because Michigan's looking for a coach. San Francisco isn't too high on Harbaugh. And then, yeah, the Bo Schembechler thing, when I was doing my research for this, I was comparing national championships, and I noticed that, like, the handful of Michigan's championships came in, like, 1908, 1909, 1910, and Bo Schembechler never won one, which I didn't realize until I looked at it. But, yeah, I agree with you. Florida definitely, in my opinion, is the top one for essentially the same reason. Best conference, but they're in the easier division, which I think is definitely a huge advantage they have there. The best recruiting bed, the best weather. I've never been to Gainesville or to the University of Florida, but I heard the facilities are a bit not as good as Nebraska and Michigan are, but I think the recruiting bed, the conference kind of outweighs that. Regarding Michigan, Nebraska, it's tough for me because Michigan does have 11 championships, but kind of similar to Nebraska, in my opinion, they're falling off a little bit. I don't think both of these programs aren't what they were 10, 15 years ago. Michigan's looking for their third coach in 6 years. I think the Big Ten's falling off a little bit. And then you have Nebraska, which, again, is falling off a little bit ever since Osborne left. But it's still a great program. Top 15 in the country, in my opinion. I think everyone would agree with that. You'd probably rank it even higher, probably top 10. Not a great recruiting area. Great stadium and facilities, though. So if I had to rank them, I'd probably put Michigan 2, Nebraska 3, but it's more of a Michigan 2A, Nebraska 2B for me. A bit of a mini question I want to ask you. Does being in the Big Ten, does that hurt or help Nebraska compared to being in the Big 12?
I guess it depends how you look at it. From solely a championship and goal measurements and goal objectives, if you win the division here, I mean, you can't win a division in the Big 12 right now. Right. So you have that benchmark you can fall back on if you're not winning the championship, the Big Ten championship. So you can fall back on that. I think in terms of recruiting, I think it might hurt you a little bit because we can't pull the players from Texas like we used to. But I think if you want to look at the easiest path to a championship, that Big Ten West is where it's at. I mean, you got some respectable teams in Wisconsin and Minnesota, but Nebraska has more resources than anybody in the division. And if you're any competitive coach, you can be like, I can just go to the Big Ten West, play Ohio State and Michigan State every year in the Big Ten Championship, and take my chances getting into the playoff.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I tend to agree with that. You got to look at it It depends on how you're looking at it, basically. That makes sense. Let's move on to the college football playoff. It was released on Tuesday night. Alabama 1, Oregon 2. TCU jumped over Florida State. They're now 3. Florida State's 4. Ohio State 5. Baylor 6. I don't know about you, Derek, but I had no issues with this. A lot of people are, wondering two things: why is Florida State now at 4, and why is TCU now at 3, and why is TCU still above Baylor? And I'll tell you why I don't have an issue with it. I don't think that the committee should rank these teams based on who is the most deserving or who has most earned that spot. I think, you got to rank them on who is the best team and what would they do against the other teams that they're ranked next to. So, for instance, I would take Alabama on a neutral field against anyone in the country. I would take Oregon against anyone in the country on a neutral field other than Alabama. I would take TCU against anyone in the country on a neutral field other than Oregon and Alabama. Honestly, I would take Florida State to lose against everyone in the top 6. Wow. I would take Florida State to lose against Ohio State and Baylor, but I understand why they're ranked 4th. Because if I were to ask 50 college football writers who would win on a neutral field between TCU and Florida State, I would guess that 35 to 40 of them would say TCU. That's why I have no problems with TCU being ranked ahead of Florida State and TCU being ranked ahead of Baylor, because on a neutral field, I like TCU to beat Baylor.
Okay. I mean, I was kind of in agreement with you in terms of the rankings and who's in the top 4, and we're going to talk a little bit about how the system should work here in a bit, but we should just go by Vegas odds. I mean, Vegas has they have some bias in terms of trying to get some money in the casinos or whatever. Right. But if you just go by Vegas odds, who would be favored? It's basically kind of similar to the system you took right there to kind of come up with your top 4. But I don't mind the system. I think even though TCU lost to Baylor right now in the rankings, TCU blew like a 30-point lead in like 5 minutes at the end of the game. Right. If they played again, people would take TCU over Baylor. Now, exactly. I can see people's argument where you play it, they settle this on the field. I don't know. I'd still want to put the best 4 teams, and that's the criteria, basically. Put the best 4 teams, not who beat who. And I think I don't have any qualms about who's in the top 4 right now.
Yeah, I don't either. And the crazy thing is like, let's say this would have happened last year or next year, and TCU played Baylor at home, then I think TCU beats them, and like we're not even having this discussion. So yeah, I got no problems with the top 4. Honestly, I wouldn't even have a problem if Florida State wasn't in it. I don't think Florida State's that good. I think Georgia Tech's going to beat them on Saturday, but I understand why they're there. They're undefeated. They haven't lost yet, so you kind of got to put them in there. The next question: do you think 4 teams is enough? I mean, everyone's talking about Ohio State, Baylor, Arizona's starting to get some love. People are saying if Arizona beats Oregon on Friday, then they might get into the top 4. What's your opinion on how the college football playoff should be set up?
I know I'm in the minority here, but I actually liked the BCS. But first of all, I mean, bracket creep is going to be inevitable in all brackets. I mean, even college basketball, we have 64 teams, and it still creeps to 68. So there's always going to be people complaining. I think if you're going to expand it, though, I think you need to go to 8 teams. Go with the Power 5 teams. You get the conference champion from those Power 5 conferences, a school from the group of 5 schools, and then 2 wild cards. I think if you go with 8, I think that would actually work out pretty perfectly. I took a little sneak peek at your notes, and I did like the logistics that you came up with, but I'll let you talk about that here in a bit. But what I really want, and I think you're going to disagree with this, is I want to mandate all conferences to go to 12 teams, and each conference have a championship game mandatory, and that'll eliminate some of this clutter at the top here at the end of the season.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I just think that all conferences, the NCAA should require all conferences to either have a championship game or not have a championship game, because I mean, look at it like this year. Like, if TCU and Baylor had a championship game, that's essentially a play-in game to the playoff. And now that they don't, I mean, Baylor could get left out, which is going to upset some people. So I wouldn't have a problem with that. I just think that all conferences should either have a championship game or not have one. But how I think it should be set up, I actually wrote a paper on this my freshman year and received an A+ on it.
Nice, good job.
When I was saying that the BCS needs to be eliminated. Basically, it's a selection committee just like there is right now, but instead of 4 teams, they pick 12. The top 4 seeds get a bye, and then seeds 5 play seed 12, 6v11, so on and so forth. That game is played at the higher seeds campus. So, for instance, this year, Alabama, Oregon, TCU, Florida State would all have byes, and then Ohio State would play whoever's ranked 12th. I don't have the rankings in front of me, in Columbus. The winner of those games move on to the Elite Eight, whatever you want to call it. Those games are played at the most popular bowls. So the Cotton, the Orange, the Rose, the Sugar, Fiesta, and the Peach. And then you have the national championship game the first year at Jerry World, kind of how it is this year. Those games rotate. So a location will get a national championship game every 7 years. I just think I'm not buying the whole conference champion receives an automatic bid thing, because there's going to be 1 year where, the Big 12 or the Big 10 or the ACC. Can you imagine if Georgia Tech beat Florida State and then Georgia Tech's in the playoff? I just don't think that that's the best criteria to get the best teams in the playoff. And if a conference misses out on the playoff, if their conference champion isn't good enough, then I'm fine with that. Just because I think there'd be a year where the Big 12 or the Big 10, like I said, their conference champion was ranked 23rd in the polls, and they're going to get blown out by the team that's ranked 5th or whatever. So, yeah, I'm not buying the whole conference champion thing. I just think they should be seeded based on who's the best. But yeah, so that's how I would run it. In order to do this, you would need to get rid of the conference championship games, either that or get rid of a non-con game, because then these colleges would be playing like 15 games, which that really wouldn't be right. First round games would be played on the second weekend of December, Elite Eight games the third weekend, Final Four games played on New Year's Eve, and then the national championship game played on the second Monday of January, just like it is now.
Love it. I love the logistics of that.
Yeah, I think it would work out, but I don't see it happening. I think eventually the playoffs is going to move to 8, which I'm perfectly okay with. I think the more, not necessarily the more the merrier. I don't want to see college football have a 32 or 64 team playoff, but I think an 8 team, a 12 team, a 16 team playoff would be awesome. I just think the entertainment value in that would be so incredible. You'd have so many games that featured top 15 teams. I just think that'd be so much fun to watch.
Oh, I couldn't imagine the atmosphere for a playoff game on campus. That'd be so great.
Exactly. And people talk about, well, if you get rid of championship games, then money, where's that conference going to get that money from? Conferences could work something out to where if their conference, so let's say Alabama was hosting a playoff game on their campus, then that money would go to the SEC. And conferences are rewarded for having a team that good playing in the playoff, because a conference could potentially have 3 or 4 or 5 teams playing in the playoff. So I just think that'd be really fun and really interesting. Do you ever think, when do you think the playoff's gonna move to 8 teams?
I guess what's the contract now? I think it lasts till 2018 or something. I might have just made that number up, but I think it'll be
6 more years. But they can always break that.
Yeah, I think it'll be sooner than whatever the contract says. I think it'll be probably half of that. There'll be enough for this year, and it'll just keep snowballing until they expand it to 8.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's only a matter of time until they go to 8. They might make it to the end of the contract. But yeah, I think I would say by 2020 it's an 18 playoff.
I can see that.
So all right, let's move on. We're gonna try something new. We're gonna go to the Hurried Hot Seat. All right, so I'm gonna give Derek a number of different questions, very quick questions. Kind of ask him on the spot. These questions can come from anywhere. Obviously, I have a lot of college football questions. So it's kind of that time of year. But we mixed in some NFL, some NBA, some college basketball questions as well. So, Derek, are you ready?
Whew. Let's do this.
All right, here we go. How many wins for Nebraska football this year?
9.
Better program, Arkansas or Nebraska?
Nebraska.
Better program, Oklahoma or Nebraska?
Why you gotta do this to me, man? I would go Oklahoma. They got a recruiting base. They got a better coach right now.
Better program, Oregon or Nebraska?
If I was a kid coming out of school right now, I'd go Oregon.
Who will be Michigan's head coach next year?
Les Miles.
Who is at their job longer, Mike Riley or Jim McElwain?
Mike Riley. I mean, we kept Bo for 7 years. Mike Riley's going to get 10.
Speaking of Bo, where will he be coaching next year? What will he be coaching?
He will be the defensive coordinator under the old ball coach at South Carolina.
How many wins for the Philadelphia 76ers this year?
Oh, man. Well, they got one yesterday, which is crazy. If they're not shooting at the wrong hoop again to start the game, I'm going to give them 9.
The NFL MVP this year is who?
Aaron Rodgers.
The Heisman winner this year will be who?
I think it should be Melvin Gordon, but I'm going to go with Marcus Mariota.
The winner of the college football playoff will be who over who?
Alabama over Oregon.
Who is the third best team in college basketball this year, assuming that you have Kentucky and Duke 1 and 2?
Man. You said Kentucky and Duke 1 and 2? I'll go Arizona.
Okay. And then last but not least, how many hours did you actually work this week during the Nebraska coaching search?
I really hope my boss is not watching this, but probably about 5 hours in the last 4 days.
That's all right. That's kind of how I've been too, paying attention to the KU search. Who we still
you guys
haven't.
I thought you guys picked up Warner.
That's what people are saying, but these sources aren't exactly too reliable. For instance, like none of the Lawrence Journal World beat writers or the KU sports guys are reporting it yet. But Ed Warner, David Beatty, the Texas A&M offensive or quarterbacks coach, and then Clint Bowen, the interim coach, are the three names right now. I think Clint Bowen would be awful. After the TCU game, I thought he was the guy, but I think the players just kind of exhausted themselves during the TCU game and kind of went all out, because against Oklahoma, speaking of Oklahoma, I spoke too early on Melvin Gordon breaking the record against Nebraska, because Samaje Perine, he went and broke the record 6 days later against my Kansas Jayhawks, so I think I jinxed myself on that one. But KU looked awful against Oklahoma. They played terrible against K-State too. So I don't think Clint Bowen's the guy. My choice is Willie Fritz from Georgia Southern. He's won everywhere he's been. He runs the triple option, which I think KU's running backs are actually not bad, so I think KU could do well at that. But Ed Warner and David Beatty, definitely I would love both those guys. David Beatty can recruit Texas. Ed Warner is apparently he can develop players like no other. I was reading some Ohio State articles, and apparently Ed Warner is one of a kind at developing his players. But apparently he's kind of like Bo Pelini and Mark Mangino, so he's not very nice on the field. But, hey, whatever it takes to win. I've always said it. All KU football has to do is win 7 or 8 games, 6 or 7 games a year, throw in an 8-win year every 5 years, get it to basketball season, and it's the greatest football coach KU would ever have. So.
I'm surprised you guys don't want Bo Pelini. He's so great.
Some people have talked about it, but that's not happening. Yeah, people have talked about him and Muschamp, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
At least I don't think it's going to happen. I hope it's not going to happen.
We'll see what happens, but you got basketball season anyways.
Yeah, basketball season's tipped off. Huge win for KU on Sunday against Michigan State. Big game tomorrow night against Florida, although Florida's pretty down this year. Tomorrow night's going to be good for college basketball. Texas versus Kentucky, and then KU against Florida right after that. So nice daily double there.
It'll be interesting.
Cool. Well, it was nice to get on this again. We're going to try to do this every week or two. Hopefully next time we do this, we can talk about who KU hired, break that down a little bit. But this has been NCB Live. My name is Tate Volbach for Derek Hernandez. We'll see you guys later.
I'm out.